Hey YouTube, welcome back. Just a quick video. It's about May, I don't know, 5th-ish. I'm not sure which day it is. I'm losing track of time. Just thought I'd show the blossoms are out on the crabapple. Not as many as you'd expect because a lot of the wood is not 2 years old yet because it was some growth. I've been trying to balance this tree out. As you can see, there's a trunk that goes off to the left. That's the shape the whole tree kind of did when I first bought the property because this area that's now cleared to the right was a bunch of overgrown, dying trees that shaded it out pretty much the entire season, so it never got any sunlight, so it kind of grew out to the left to where it was more of an open meadow, and so it was a really unbalanced tree. But over the, I guess, 4 years I've been training this tree, I finally got the right hand side to start catching up, so you see a lot of new growth there that by the end of next year, if I can get the what's from this vantage point, the right hand side to catch up another 6 inches or so, and just thicken up the main branch caliper by a ½ inch or so, if that's something I can arrange, it'll be a balanced tree. So I keep pruning it and trying to encourage it to do the right thing, and it's starting to be a really pretty tree, which is nice. It's one of 2 crab apples that were here on the property that I absolutely loved. The flowers smell great. It's perfect to be like out pruning this time of year because you get to smell the blossoms and everything. It's not the ideal time to prune apples, but it's more pleasant to do so for humans, I guess. Over here you can see in that cage and in this cage are 2 fruit apples that I planted. These are wine saps. They've been here for, I think this is their 3rd season in the ground. They were super pathetic, big box stores rejects that I purchased in September, the year that I planted them. They were pretty sickly and sad, but they're both very healthy plants now. This one is a little worse for wear with some of the weeping branches still on it that I haven't cut from the original, but it's finally putting on upright, vigorous growth. And the one over there is easily 2 feet taller than this one that were planted at the same height, the same size. This tree right here I just put in this spring. I guess I'll just document it for posterity's sake. It's got the first hints of little flowers coming on it. I believe this is a peach of Indian blood variety. So it should be a red-fleshed peach when it's done, or when it starts fruiting. It'll be a while still. I did an experiment on this one. The mulch is a mixture of biochar that I made from burning the brush on the property from the previous season's pile, along with a little bit of just regular sawdust that I had, or wood shavings that I had laying around. Normally, you know, the brown wood shavings you wouldn't really use for much. It's not good for mulch because it doesn't have the green, quote-unquote, in it. But we'll see. Just mostly to retain moisture is kind of why I put it here, because I didn't actually mulch the tree with real mulch. So this one will be a bit of an experiment. See how well it does. And I planted 2 other trees of the exact same variety and exact same size, so you know, taking into account the difference for their location and sunshine exposure, etc., it's a good control for an experiment. So we'll see how that goes. Looking out here through the woods, just a shot of you know, the remainder of my property going down to the waterfall. I've dragged 2 big trees that fell over this winter, or sorry, last year. They were there all season long, so I didn't have time to get to them. I dragged those 2 out, and wouldn't you know it, the day before I dragged the second one out, a 3rd large tree fell in the stream, so I still have a massive tree to pull out that's still down in the stream. But I'll be excited to do that and get that stream cleared up and back to kind of pristine situation. And I had a couple other trees that I probably should cut that are on the bank that look like they're about to fall. Another little update, just because I like keeping track of these particular trees. These were also some big box stores degenerate leftover end of season specials. They're 2 different kinds of red maple. They're not the same, but they're both very beautiful. And these were, I think, purchased for $5 a piece or $6 a piece. Normally they're probably like a $50 tree at this point, so I have high hopes for them. I've been training, you know, each of them to try to grow straighter because they were very wilty when I got them. But I think they're gonna finally come into their own maybe this season if I can just continue to keep the deer off them, keep them happy. They get a nice balance of sun and shade here, where it's not too hot in summertime. It gets plenty of natural rainfall that comes, you know, from running down this embankment or the pitch from the lawn. Over here, you can see a wood pile I stacked from one of the trees that I dragged out of the stream and spent time cutting that up with a chainsaw. I still have to buck it up with my, I have to split the rounds with my splitting maul. I've been splitting tons of wood from the piles that I've had here. Literally, some of the trees go back to 5 years ago when I pulled out the original deadfall from the property. But I built some pallets, or I modified some pallets into some larger pallets that I can move with the tractor forks to stack up the wood and try to keep it organized over there. But again, not to glamorize it, the tractor does a bunch of work, but the tractor had flat tires the other day, so after patching them a billion seasons in a row, the tractor finally got new front tires the other day, which is good. They should last another several years because I got a lot of years out of the first set of tires, and I used this tractor way too much the first few years I got it, just trying to clear this land and get things in shape. But I still have to stack the rest of the rounds that I've already split. I have to buck up this one large tree that you can see laying over here on the ground. This is one that fell in a storm this past weekend. It's been very high wind storm this season for 2020 for spring. A lot of intense rain and wind, which is snapping a lot of dead and dying trees. And speaking of dying trees, I should mention that my property has quite a few really nice ash trees that unfortunately are all infected with ash borer. So unfortunately they're probably going to all die. In fact, almost assuredly they'll all die, which is very sad. So I'm gonna have to either take them out preemptively to avoid crashes in the middle of the night and messes to pick up, or just let nature run its course. But there's no surviving it as far as I know. The trees get infected, they die, and several of the most mature trees that I have, unfortunately, are ash trees. That's very sad. Pile of brush I got to clean up and burn. There's consistent, every time there's a windstorm or rainstorm, I get branches that fall and come out and pick them up, and I'm not complaining. It's just part of the maintenance, and I don't want to over glamorize what it's like to live on a piece of acreage like this size. It's constant maintenance of just literally picking up sticks after every storm, and then you bundle them up and you cut them into little pieces, and some are big enough to burn for future firewood. Some of them are just sticks and branches you should either mulch or pay to have hauled off, or you can burn them and turn them in a char and use it as fertilizer for the orchard, which is what I do. So it's a view of that. Just take you around to some of the other fruit trees that you might be interested in. I'm not going to do a full video right now because I really don't have the time, but I wish I did. This tree over here is a different kind of peach that I planted 2 years ago. This is the second year in the ground. This is a July Alberta, so it's a kind of July ripening peach, very kind of popular, common peach to plant. Beautiful blossoms. Didn't have many this year. I'm pretty positive it's too young to fruit or anything, so really just for show at this point. But it's a cold hardy tree, so I have high hopes for it. It did really well putting on growth last year. I would say maybe 6 inches of growth. I'm hoping this year to see at least 12 inches of growth on this thing, and I'll start getting some of the final scaffold branches left in place, which would be nice. Coming over here, this is an apple tree from a big box store that I purchased again, end of season, highly discounted. This is the, I believe, second year in the ground for this tree, although it was a much larger tree just from the big box store, so it was actually a pretty good value. I try not to memorize the price of everything, but I have a pretty good memory, and I want to say this tree was somewhere around like $17 or something like that I paid for. So it is large enough this year that it might actually set fruit, so I'm kind of optimistic. If it does, that'll be cool. It would be the first of the big box stores, I think, to have set fruit here. There's some pear trees as well. Let me take you over here. I'm kind of crisscrossing in this area. Walking towards this tall, spindly one with the white blossoms. This is a fruiting pear, and I don't even remember the variety because I literally purchased it and planted it like the next day. It was another closeout special at the end of the year. It should be the name of this orchard, is the big box closeout special orchard. As you can see, this is a kefir. Not my favorite pear to eat, but hey, why not? For, I think, like I said, I paid about $10 for this tree, or $15 on sale at the end of the season. It's got to be, right now I'm saying that tree is probably 12 foot tall, and it has terrible branching. I mean, it really doesn't have much for side branches, but I'm gonna let it go this season and see what happens. If it doesn't put on some really good side growth, I may top the tree back off at about 6 foot at the end of the season, so it encourages better branching for next year. The tree's straight on in the distance with the green blush on top, if you can see it to the right of the peach tree. That's a flowering pear over there that I planted. In fact, I'll take you over there rather than making you try to squint at your display or scream at me about how I'm a terrible cameraman, which I know is true. Thanks for not piling it in the comments. I get it. Not that I get a lot of comments anyway. Yeah, this tree right in front of us with the lush green foliage is a flowering pear. It is not a Bartlett. It's another kind. I don't remember the name offhand, actually. But I have 2 of them, and they're both doing very well. So these make good pollinators because they flower for a very, very long time. That tree this year in 2020 is probably 12 foot or 13 foot tall. So it's doing very well. It's next to this tree with the crooked trunk. This crooked trunk tree is actually a pear tree that was a European variety, probably grew from a seed that a bird dropped or something, or perhaps one of the horses that used to be on the property, or just a discarded core from a pear that a human ate. But I did grafts. I think I showed these in a previous video. No real signs of life, unfortunately, on the grafts. I'm a little bummed because they're still green under the bark if I do the scratch test, which, you know, shows that they're not totally dead, but there's no active growth coming from the tips yet. There is growth from the bottom below the graft union, so I know the branch is still alive, as you can see that. But these upper buds haven't broken dormancy. Apologies, it won't seem to focus really well right there. Same thing here. I did a graft there, cleft graft. That one, you know, the graft is strong. It's not moving, but no signs of life. And then here, this bud graft I did was definitely alive because it broke through the wax tape or the grafter's tape. But I am not seeing any activity since it broke through. So I don't know if it's because it dried out or it's what. Same thing, there's another graft I did up here. All Asian pear varieties, trying to convert this tree over. My intention, and I also did 2 of the upper branches that are out in the canopy. My intention is that if I can get any one of the Asian pear varieties to take on this trunk, I'm going to cut the rest of the trunk off and basically just graft top work over the entire tree to something else, because it's got a wonderful root system. It's a, you know, large tree. It's probably, you know, a foot in diameter, and it would easily become the fastest producing pear tree on this property, I think. So that's my intention for that. I'll keep you posted on the progress if anybody's interested. Take a walk over here through the apple orchard for anybody who might want to just see what's going on. A couple more apples I planted this year. This one was like put in this season. This is a Wixen, which I learned about from another YouTube channel, a guy who specializes in kind of interesting skills for just survival that people have forgotten. The channel's called Skill Cult. It's really good. You should check it out. He does a lot of great apple crossing videos. Like he's a scientist at heart for sure, and he's sort of a agrarian pioneer by day-to-day life, it seems. So interesting guy. I've talked to him a little bit on discussions on some of his live streams. Anyway, this apple's called Wixen, and it comes highly recommended by him. So we're going to give it a shot. So again, check out his channel, skillcult.com. It's his website. He sells scion wood and cool pollen for cross-pollinating stuff, which I hope to do at some point, and put in some test rows of new varieties, which would be really cool. And yeah. Anyway, looking down through the rows, as you can see, I've got life on this entire row except for the second to the last. There's 4 trees per row. The second to last died last year. I'm not seeing any signs of life from it this year, so I think it truly is dead. The one on the furthest end was mauled by deer, and it's nothing but a little sad twig at this point. But as you can see, this was a Pixie Crunch, which is supposed to be a really good small apple, specialized, you know, not specialized, but especially attractive to children because they're so small. They're like a snack. You don't waste, you know, a kid eating half an apple kind of thing. This is another Pixie Crunch that has survived, but is a pathetic little twig. But it's growing vigorously, so I have hopes it'll come back. I've got this one right here. Doesn't look like it's broken dormancy yet this year, so I think it might not make it. This tree right here really doesn't look good. I think it's probably dead. I'll find out in about another 3 weeks or so. If it hasn't broken dormancy, it'll be too late. But again, I have a second variety of everything, and the second variety on this is another casualty of the deer, which is a whopping foot tall with pitiful growth. Just not doing well. I might replace both of these next year. I did that with several trees in the orchard this year. I think there was 6 trees I had to replace that I knew were dead and I could get replacements for by ordering them last fall. But by and large, you know, the status of most of the trees at this point in the year is this. They're, you know, it's a 4 foot tall wire mesh. So you can see the trees are not quite 4 foot tall for the most part. Some are a little taller. You know, the diameter of the trunks is half an inch, maybe, inch at the base. This is not like what you see on the YouTube videos in California where people can get, you know, in one season they grow 6 foot of tree trunk. That's just not what we get here in terms of growing season and conditions, and my soil's probably not great. I should get it tested, and I plan to see if it needs further amendments. I've never really fertilized these much. I gave them a little fertilizer this spring just because some of them were so sad looking. I thought it couldn't hurt. Here's a really late breaking one that I think was a transplant I just put in. This was a maiden, or a single sort of stick, so to speak, that was entirely dead before. So this is a brand new tree that I just put in this year to replace one that died. Its twin did fine. The reason, again, I planted all the original trees as twins, pairs of the same variety, or couples of the same variety. I'm going to use couples instead of pairs because pairs gets confusing when you're talking about apple trees. But this one was attacked by deer and just didn't survive, which was before I started doing the institutional policy of surrounding the entire property with a 6-strand electric fence at this point. I may add more strands, but then also individually caging each tree. I still get small deer that come in underneath the fence, or when there's an outage in the power for the solar charger. So it's a constant battle to keep the deer out of here so the trees can have a shot at living. This row looks pretty good. I mean, again, you look at the strange shape of these trees. It's not uncommon for people who study the tree to tell you to cut the tree off at basically knee-high anyway, just to encourage good rooting. Well, in my case, I didn't have a choice. They were snapped right off or chewed right to the bottom or whatever, to the point where this is what I get. You know, that's about a maybe 2 foot tall, well, not even 2 foot tall, 15 inches, 16 inches tall tree at the trunk that was kind of snapped clean off, and it's got some disease and rot in it, but it's young enough and it's growing vigorously. I think it'll come back, and it'll obviously have to be trained to a different shape, or prune off all the side branches and leave one new central leader. My intention for this orchard was always the open center, kind of small height tree plan, rather than letting them be tall, massive trees. Most are semi-dwarf varieties. I think only a couple of trees I couldn't get in a semi-dwarf variety. And that doesn't matter much anyway, because if you study apples, really it's up to the exact rootstock and your soil conditions about how big they get anyway. And most people, when you order a semi-dwarf tree online like I did, they won't actually tell you the rootstock unless you call and make a special order or something. It's just sort of whatever they have that fits the bill. So yeah, this is a case of, one of the original trees had a taller trunk, but the top was chewed off. So I've got some really strange growth. I've got a lot of scarring down here on the trunk. I don't know if you can see that, but the bark has all been rubbed off by deer that were in the rut season, where they just rub their antlers and all that stuff on the trees. So they're young. I hope they bounce back. This is last year I had pretty good success keeping the deer off them, but not as great as I wish I could have. But so far this year I've had deer in the orchard and they don't bother the trees. They've sort of learned at this point that it's not worth messing with anything in a fence, and they kind of avoid it and just eat the meadow grass. Yeah, it's a lot of work to keep the deer out, and they still get in. So yeah, we'll continue doing remediation. These two really tall specimens are not like freaks of nature. They were actually replacement trees I planted last week, and they are big box stores replacements because the two trees were actually just run-of-the-mill Golden Delicious, nothing fancy or heirloom. I just wanted a pair of them in here because I don't mind the taste of them. A lot of people think Golden Delicious apples are terrible. They're not. They're a pretty good eating apple, in my opinion. The Red Delicious is god-awful and terrible, and I think people get them confused and think a Golden Delicious tastes like a Red Delicious, but they don't. So they still need to be pruned. I just put them in the ground, like I said, sometime in the last week. There's a lot of, water sprouts, the vertical shoots, and they need to be kind of trained out. So I'm going to get on that pretty quickly. I might even top the trees just to get them more in line with the rest of the orchard. But I don't know. I may just leave them and let them grow once I train some of the branches down. This place is so hard on trees that I almost feel bad to prune them early, even though I know it's what's right to do. It's just the growth is so slow here. You kind of want to keep whatever branches you can get. This was a replacement tree I put in this year. That looks like it's got plenty of buds about to break. A little late. In fact, the pair of these are both like that. They both died for some reason. I don't know. It's Bramley seedling, which, as I understand it, is not a difficult tree to grow, from what I gather. It's been grown for a long, long time. It's an English apple, I believe. But it did not do well here between the combination of deer pressure and I don't know if it was really susceptible to the apple scab, or the cedar apple rust, rather, that I get here, where the trees just didn't make it. So I put in a new set of them. And just so people can understand, this is basically a 4-foot tall whip with a pretty good trunk diameter. That's probably 3/4 of an inch at the base, or an inch. that's basically what all of these trees were when I got them. And now some of the trees are, you know, to compare, it's legitimately about 1.5 feet of the original tree left with some twiggy growth coming out of it. So I don't know. You can kind of get a sense it's not all sunshine and apple pie on the orchard situation. Again, it's not as glamorous as I think sometimes people think it is. But don't get me wrong, it's wonderful to have a place like this where I can walk around and spend my free time, especially now why so many people are under you know, conditions where they can't leave their apartments and living in cities and stuff. So that's why I'm kind of taking this video, just to let people have a sense of what I get to experience. Maybe you're cooped up at home, maybe you can't leave, maybe you're just bored, I don't know. I hope you enjoy the video. Let's keep going. This is the end of the apple orchard here. And there are other apple trees sporadically planted around the property that are all one-offs or something kind of unique. That block, looking back at it, you know, we started out at our little journey for the walk way over where the tractor is down there, and just made it through, I think it's 16 rows, 16 rows by 4 trees wide. It's quite some apples. Let's take a look at some of the other stuff I put in earlier this year in 2020, just for archival purposes. Over here, we've got some kind of plum, I believe, or a pluot, I don't remember. Yeah, I don't remember. Flavor grenade pluot is what this one is. It's a pretty good, good looking tree. Came from Trees of Antiquity, which I've had great success with. At least it seems like more of their trees survive for me than trees from other vendors. This is a weeping flowering cherry. I believe it's the Yoshino, if I'm not mistaken. Had a beautiful display of flowers earlier this year, but that's past, unfortunately, so I can't show you. Over here is the grape vineyard, small little vineyard. I've got 10 trees, or 10 grapes. These two on the outside edge are the heirs to spare, basically backups for anything that might die here. I've actually had a couple, I think 2 grapevines that have died in the 2 years that they've been in the ground, so I've replaced those last season. Last season I basically got to where they're just reaching the first wire of the trellis. So by the end of this season, I hope that all of the grapes that have been in the ground will be at the first wire and trained out horizontally with their permanent sort of laterals. So yeah, 2 different kinds. This row is one kind, the further row is a different one. Over here, on this part of the property, you can see another part of the orchard. This is what I call the stone fruit orchard. It's all, you know, plums, pluots, apricots, things of that nature. And, you know, we had some pressure here where deer had taken off the tops of trees, but every one of the trees is individually caged. You can see that lovely piece of deadwood right there I just pulled off the fence the other day, because again, if you have a windstorm, it'll drop branches down on your fence, which renders your fence worthless. So constant struggle. You got to walk your property every day, which is good and bad, good for exercise, but bad if you're short on time. So but I guess we should make time for things like this. At least that's how I feel about it. All of these trees are doing really well. They're, like I said, all plums or different varieties. I'll come back and maybe name each tree in here in a separate video at some point if there's interest. But they're doing well. They seem to be fairly vigorous growers here when they're given the chance and protected from the deer. The only problem I've had with them is the Japanese beetle. It just destroys the leaves on anything that's related to stone fruit here. Plums, pluots, peaches, apricots, apriums. I've got them all. They seem to be tasty. Cherries. Over here, I've got some raised beds I put in last year. These are all blueberries in this bed. And then the bed over there is blackberries. In fact, I've got new plants that came today to finish off that bed with 4 more blackberries and 2 more blueberries that are going here to finish off that bed. Same thing over here, more thornless blackberries that I put in last year. I've got 2 new plants to add to round this out to put 6 plants total in the bed. And then this spring, in about another week or 2, I'll build the trellis mechanism to keep those trellised up. Over here, These little wispy twigs that I just planted are actually wild plum, American plum. Also called the Chickasaw plum, from the Native American word for it, as far as I understand. And then down here, these little twigs, these are actually Arctic kiwi or hardy kiwi. Those are Acai, I think, the self-fruitful variety. I have a few others that I put in as tests a couple years ago. I think I planted 6 originally of the original batch that are different variety, and only 2 I think are still alive. They didn't make it. Could be the soil, could be dehydration, so I thought I'd give them a shot in a raised bed to see if they do better here in a raised bed. Then I know I just need to plant them in a raised bed or amend my soil before I put them in the ground. This tree right here is one of 2 remaining cherry trees, sweet cherry trees that I've planted. That's a Windsor. I have had no luck with cherries here. I don't know what it is. I'm a reasonably good gardener, I think, in general. Not the greatest, but for whatever reason, I've planted about 10 or 12 different cherry trees here of the fruiting variety, and they just all die. And I don't seem to have a reason for it. It looks like either root rot or something, when everything else seems more or less to go along just fine. This is a peach or an apium of some variety. This one here is a new peach that was a replacement tree. Again, deer pressure killed the original one that was here. They sort of girdled the tree by scraping it with their antlers. But that's the state. You know, most of these are taller cages, by the way. These are about 5 foot, and then that cage, these 2 here, are 6. Over the years, I realized that I should put just bigger cages on each tree to give them more room to grow, because soon they'll outgrow what they have, and it just makes more work. It's more expensive up front to put a giant cage around a small tree, but don't kid yourselves, it's a false economy if you end up having to throw the wire away. Just put the right size cage around it to protect it to begin with, and bite the bullet, I guess. Also, if we're going to talk about costs, just for giggles, I mean, here I have hot summers, and sometimes it goes for a while without any rain. I've had to mulch everything, so I figure I'm going through about 60 bags of mulch, just mulching the fruit trees every year. And that's a policy that I don't want to do. I prefer trees without mulch in terms of aesthetics, but here, to get them established for the first 5 years or so, they're going to remain being mulched. These 2 trees that I just walked by, those are actually almond trees, a hardy variety for the northern climate that I live in New York State. And I've planted an entire row or ring of almond trees around the perimeter of the house on this berm. And I'll take you through that at some other point, because those are really not that exciting to look at, because they just went in this spring and they're just maidens that are about 3 foot tall. This is another big box special pear that I put in to replace a cherry tree that had died, strangely enough. The cherry tree died, and then I put this pear in, and it's been thriving here since. So this one is a kefir. Again, not my favorite variety, but it actually had a couple fruit on it when I bought it, so I'm hoping it sets fruit this year. Over here on the berm, as I said, in the ring that's closest to the house, those are all almond trees, which have a beautiful pink blossom, very much like a peach when they get mature. And then in the secondary ring, it's a combination of peaches, apples, whatever. It just has pretty flowers and such. This is an apple I put in last year at Fuji. This was a local retailer that had this apple. It's not a big box store, but a very healthy, good-sized caliper trunk that's almost 2 inches at the bottom. I'm optimistic. Next year, this one should put on some fruit, I think. Pretty excited about that. Just an example of one of the almond trees that I just put in. They're very small. They're twigs. You know, that's maybe 3/8 of an inch in diameter. It's very, very small, but they're leafed out, and I'm optimistic. Even the biggest trees on this property started out as a twig at one point, so keep that in mind. This is one of my peach trees. It's actually quite healthy in terms of vigorous growth at the top, but I have some sort of pest or, I don't know, frost issue. I can't tell what it is, actually. For a while I thought it might be borers in the trunk, but I don't know. I can't tell what it is. The bark is split. It's not girdled all the way around, obviously, but it is not healthy at the base. I have got to do something in terms of spraying for funguses, and then I'm going to paint the bottom part of the trunk with white diluted latex paint to make sure it's not just something that's splitting from frost in the winter or sunshine in the winter time or something. I don't know. coming around. This is a special almond. It's a little different than the other ones just because this is a pollinator for the others. But as you can see, this is a brand new tree that just went in. And it's got little tiny buds on it, so I'm optimistic that one might come on as well as the rest, and should actually eventually cause the other almond trees to produce fruit, or nuts I should say. Here's another almond. Again, not too impressive yet, but in future years these should really be the star of the show in the springtime with blossoms and color. Over here is an example of 3 cherry trees that I put in a temporary spot. Good sun, but the only one alive is the one in the middle. And it's alive, but it's not what I would consider a super healthy tree. It's hasn't really put on any leaves yet this year, which is sad. The buds were swollen like it was going to emerge. But I'll tell you, it is not a healthy looking tree. Down here are the original kiwis that I put in this test plot to see what they would do in the soil that's here natively. And of the 4 that are still here, because 1 was taken out or 2 were taken out previous years that had died, only 2 have green sprouts on them right now. So that's a little sad. This is an experiment right here, this tree with a wild pin cherry on the base, and I grafted over the top to a sweet cherry variety to see if it would take on a native rootstock that grows like a weed here. But it looks like so far, I don't know, so far it looks like my graft, this won't really focus on that, I apologize. It looks like the graft isn't taking. I don't see any vigorous growth. I don't see any, buds opening up. I think it's going to be just a dead end. Over here is one of the 2 red leaf plums, thundercloud plums that I planted. This one's doing really, really well. The one over there, on the other side of the truck and the car, not doing so well, but that one has had a rougher life in terms of having to be moved around a couple times because it was in the way. Anyway, this video is really long now. It's about 30 minutes. It's probably longer than anybody would dare watch this thing, but I thought I would just give you an update and record it for posterity. Thanks for sticking around with me, and I'll talk to you later.